the Filipino community, Filipino working class, and the United States working class have always been intrinsically linked. And we have 3 speakers. We have Howard KEYLOR. Howard KEYLOR, as we say, is a living treasure, particularly to the Filipino community. He personally knew, and was acquainted, and was actually a comrade of our first generation of Filipino trade unionists. He got to know them during the 1949 Asparagus Strike. And these men, as you know, as we recounted, they included Chris Gonsalves, who was in the film. They included Ernie Manawan, Carlos Bulosan, and Larry Itliong, right? Philip, he'll tell you, Philip Vera Cruz was just pretty young at the time. But these were men who dedicated themselves to trade unionist activity. They were in the Communist Party, USA, and worked from the California fields to the Alaskan canneries. So that was what really inspired them. Can you imagine someone like Itliong and Gonsalves from the 20s to the 30s and the 40s, bitter defeats, difficult struggles, purges, assassinations, attempts to deport, and yet they continued up to the 1965 Grape Strike. Can you imagine what it was? So in the second generation, well, we've seen our share of grief, the assassinations in '81. But that's the life of being a political trade unionist in this country. You prepare yourself for that. So that's Howard KEYLOR, and he's going to talk to us about that first generation of Filipino trade unionists and political activists. Al Rojas, let me tell you, we're very, very honored to have Al. He's another warrior that just keeps fighting, right? He was a founding member of the United Farm Workers, is UFWOC, right? After the initial merger. And he'll tell you a little bit about that formation. He'll also talk to you about the internal workings and what became and what is the UFW today. Okay, what is it really today? I know that there's going to be huge celebrations, especially in Delano, and what really is being celebrated. Okay? Right now we know, and Al will share with you, he's in touch with trade unions in Mexico. He's in touch with agricultural workers up and down the West Coast. So he has his hand on his finger on the pulse. There are a growing number of spontaneous uprisings among the agricultural workers, the Sakuma workers up in Washington, the strawberry workers down in Baja, in San Quintin, and the tomato workers in Mendota, right? So you see it coming up. The poultry in the packing there in Fresno, it's coming up. The workers are beginning to feel that it's time to move and to change. So, and then myself, I'm JANE GALVISO, and I help to bring the food. I farm. I have a farm in Tulare County, Ilokano Farms, and we are the last community of traditional Filipino farmers left in this country. Our communities have been so decimated by agribusiness. The cost of having a farm, almost every farmer has a wife or children that are working off the farm, just like me, to keep the farm going. There's no way you can farm and make a living unless you are a corporate farmer, agribusiness. But if you're small scale, if you're a family farmer, no, there's other people in your family working to keep you going. So, and the other thing is that I grew up I grew up on a farm, and during our season, was an agricultural worker. And I'm originally from Imperial Valley, and so that's my history. So we're going to start off with I'll let you guys decide.
Brother, you want to be start?
Would you like to start?
Sure.
Yes.
I want to give some historic background about the first generation of Filipino labor activists as background to what later happened with the UFW. In 1947, I met a young Filipina in college who later became my wife and the mother of my 3 daughters. Her family were agricultural workers in Hawaii and later in California. We were married only after the California anti-miscegenation laws prohibiting Filipino-European marriages were overturned in 1948 by the federal courts. To my surprise, I found that many Filipinos don't even know about those anti-miscegenation laws. About the same time, I met several Filipino union activists from Local 7 FTA, Food, Tobacco, and Agricultural Workers Union. I learned about the long history of Filipino agricultural workers' strikes and union organizing struggles. I became impressed by the militancy and the cohesiveness of Filipino trade unionists. Almost all of these young Filipino men have been recruited for the remote barrios and the Ilocos and the Visayas. California corporate agribusiness assumed that rural small farming peasants would be easy to control and would not be infected by urban trade unionism. They miscalculated on 2 levels. They ignored the fact that rural Filipino peasants had a long historic record of revolt. The Filipino revolt against the Spanish imperialists and then against American imperialism were in large part peasant-driven. The corporate agricultural bosses also did not know that the barrio culture was very often a communal culture, leading to a high level of social cohesion, even under the atomizing influence of American capitalism. Unlike any other agricultural workers, the Filipinos would contract for work as a tight, cohesive unit, often of kababayan or townmates. These field workers would pool their wages and allocate out the income and work assignments as a group. Over the decades, Filipino agricultural workers waged many strikes, made many gains, but achieved no enduring trade unions with union contracts in corporate agriculture. The predominantly Filipino salmon cannery workers in Alaska, after long struggles, did get union contracts and established a stable union structure with headquarters in Seattle. This became Local 7 of the FTA, the Food, Tobacco, and Agricultural Workers Union CIO. The FTA had communist leadership. The Communist Party had earlier carried out strikes and organizing campaigns in the Central Valley of California in the 1930s and still had aspirations to establish stable unions with contracts in the industry. The FTA has successfully organized packing shed workers in lettuce, carrots, melons, and small fruit. The Salt River Valley in Arizona through the Imperial Valley, the Salinas Valley, the Central Valley, and into Northern California, as far north as Placerville. By 1949, Filipinos now had a stable union base in FTA Local 7 and determined to organize the 7,000 Filipino asparagus cutters in the Stockton Delta area. It was during that period that I came to know Larry Itliong, who lived mainly in Stockton, and Chris Mansalves, who often visited there. While working with the 1949 asparagus workers strike, I came to know Carlos Bulosan and Ernesto Magao, longtime leftist leaders of FTA Local 7. On the urging of the Communist Party, I had quit college in 1949 to participate in and help out on this historic strike. In 1947, the FTA, Food, Tobacco, and Agricultural Workers, was among the 12 unions expelled from the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Unions, for refusal to purge themselves of their leftist and alleged communist leadership. This began an orgy of assaults on these unions with open raiding by both the CIO and the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. Only 2 unions survived these assaults: International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union, ILWU, my union, and the United Electrical Workers, UE, although UE lost 90% of their membership from raids and employer attacks during this period. The government arrested many left trade union leaders for allegedly lying when they signed the Taft-Hartley non-communist affidavits in order to participate in elections for representation into their unions. Unions whose leadership did not sign these affidavits were prohibited from being on the ballot when workers voted on their desired union affiliation and were thus frozen out of legal representation. FTA Local 7 leaders and activists were arrested with the purpose of deporting them back to the Philippines. The deportations were defeated, but this struggle diverted much of this predominantly Filipino union into a desperate fight for survival, so that Local 7 no longer had the resources to continue organizing agricultural workers. The local joined the ILWU, whose leadership had no appetite to organize in agriculture. This is why Larry Itliong went to work for the AWOC, the AFL-sponsored Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, originally based in Stockton. After joining the United Farm Workers, the Filipinos remained militant and left-oriented in their ideology. In contrast to Cesar Chavez, the Filipinos believed that strikes could be won at the point of production by militant actions. They were not pacifists. To address just a few of the reasons for the decline of the UFW, the Chavez faction refused to build a normal democratic trade union structure with locals and locally elected leadership from the workers. Thus, there was no way that delegates to conventions of the UFW could be really influenced by the rank and file. This prevented any democratic correction to the mistakes of the top union leadership. The Chavez and Huerta faction was able to create a top-down bureaucratic leadership and to suppress the rank and file in decision-making. The lack of union locals strangled workers organizing in the fields. We can see how at various stages the local farm-based committees were disempowered and suppressed. The UFW contractual hiring halls were organized in such a way as to break up the traditional Filipino work units or work gangs. I'm convinced that this was not simple incompetence, as many historians describe it, since it was a ready-made model of the West Coast Longshore Union, who got the contractual hiring hall in 1934. The dispatch system in the ILWU and Longshore allowed for gangs to be dispatched in rotation to allow for equalization of earnings. I personally worked in a regular Longshore gang in Stockton. I'm convinced that this was a deliberate move to disperse and atomize the Filipino farm workers, field workers, who were seen as a potential pole of resistance to the Chavez faction. During the repeated purges in the UFW by the Chavez-Huerta faction, there were hysterical accusations of communism to justify getting rid of individuals. Cesar Chavez was always a vehement enemy of communism. Militancy during strikes ran counter to his pacifism. Given the long historical experience of militancy among Filipino agricultural workers and association with communism, these members of the UFW became a target for marginalization and disempowerment. Historians of the UFW have often commented on how puzzled they were by the reluctance or outright refusal of former UFW activists to address the firestorm of destructive purges that destroyed the union. The answer is quite simple. Those who were complicit in the purges and then themselves were later purged had great trouble coming to terms with their own complicity. I had no such problem seeing this reality because I had long since faced up to my own role in remaining silent during bureaucratic purges in several revolutionary organizations to which I had belonged. Any perspective of organizing agricultural workers, or for that fact, the vast majority of US workers who have no unions, requires that we be honest about our history, even if it is unpleasant. The betrayals of the labor union bureaucrats must always be anticipated, confronted, and struggled against. That is the struggle to which I have devoted most of my life. Thank you. presentation, see if we can have questions. Then we can all answer.
First of all, I want to thank the Manila Town Community Center and also Mary Jane, who I've known for several years. And I want to thank them. And I want to thank Steve Seltzer for all the hard work and many of the people who have been volunteering putting this together for so many years. To me, it's a very, very important element in the labor movement that lacks in the what we call Federation of Unions, the AFL-CIO, at least for that matter, and even the SCIU. I want to thank all of you who are here. I know I've met for the last maybe 30 years, 35, 40 years, Nick Jones, who was with the FW at the time that I was there, and my family, and also his family. I don't see anybody else here from that period. I guess we're getting a little bit, you know, on that side of the road. But we're here. Anyway, I want to thank my brother here, Howard, also, you know, for his excellent presentation too. You know, some very key points. First of all, I want to say that I came from a migrant family from Michoacan who landed in the San Joaquin Valley. And one of the largest ranches in San Joaquin Valley called the Tegus Ranch. It's supposed to be the corporate grower I call, who produced the peaches in the valley and was the king of the peach industry. At least in the canyon back then before it was really started doing the fresh market. That individual had maybe 18 to 20 camps, Filipino, Black, and Latino, and some poor whites from Oklahoma. That was back in 1933. That strike in 1933 was fundamental to some of the things, important points that my brother made about the movement going that far back in California. And some of you who may know, you can Google that information. Because I've been doing research, and I'm going to hopefully publish a book before they come and take me away, okay? But anyway, so from there, my parents went and left that ranch after strikes into the valley and became independent, and I'm born in 1938. In 1938, from that period on, my life was working in the fields and living in lamb shacks and chicken coop shacks when we used to migrate from Visalia to Larry into the coastal valleys, either to the lettuce, tomato, onion, garlic, or the prunes in that part of the valley, or into the northern parts, and mostly the coastal because it was very cool. Anyway, as I got older, I began to really find myself in a position of, went to school, graduated, and at the end, I couldn't go to college, and my counselor said, well, the best thing you can do, you work well with your hands, you're good at woodworking, and the only option here in the valley is go pick grapes. Okay? So I went to pick grapes. Well, then lo and behold, I ended up in Oxnard after I married or followed my wife then, became my wife into the vegetable row crop. Unbeknownst to me, Chavez was in Oxnard in 1961. Didn't know who he was. But I was working in the broccoli fields. Out of an incident, out of the reindeer, blah, 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 I ended up meeting him by accident. From that point on, we won an grievance, you know, about reindeer. And the broceros existed then. Some of you know who the broceros were. Contract slave labor. It's nothing new except to change the name today to guest workers. Now it's a nice, pretty name. But it's the same context of slavery by the corporate world in this country. And guess who now is leading the guest worker program in farm labor? The United Farm Workers Union. I call them non-farm worker leadership. And mostly dominated by the family. Nothing against the family, but I'm saying this is a labor union, belongs to the workers. I ended up organizing on our own, community organizing effort. We built, established with 500 to 800 workers, migrant workers in Oxnard, in Ventura County. Chavez had left by then. He had fought vigorously against the Bracero program. He ended up in 1964, in Delano or a little prior to that. So, no, 64, I'm sorry. My time's getting difficult. Yeah. So anyway, the bottom line is that we finally organized what was then, and many of you don't know, is the original 3 groups were the AWOC, the Filipino, mostly Filipino workers in California at least, that I know, and also not the Farmers Union or Chavez Union, the NFWA, National Farmers Association. It was not a union. It was a labor organization, non-profit. The Chavez never told anybody, nobody challenged them, nobody knew, but negotiating contracts as that kind of entity. Anyway, it passed. Our union that we had established out of the coastal areas from San Jose down to Watsonville, Salinas, Santa Maria, Oxnard, into Mexicali, Calexico, that was called the United Farmers Union. It was the independent union. We were helping Chavez going back and forth, and bottom line, he started getting money from the AFL-CIO and the UAW, and we said, can you give us at least $900 to $1,000? He says, no way. You come here, or nothing at all. We said, well, no way, we'll stay, we'll organize there, and maybe even our own independent union. He did not like that, okay? So anyway, from there at that point, we battled it out and we did our organizing, went into some strikes, we won some contracts. Then somehow, we merged with the Teamsters, that's for sure, but the Teamsters want us to go into the valley to fight off that. So, lo and behold, all of a sudden there's a merger again with the Teamsters and the UFW. All this is hopefully in the book and with a lot of documentation. So the bottom line is what happens is that I became a part, and someone became a part of what then is called the, later in 1966, the United Farmers Union. That's when we came to Delano and we began to, how would I say, live the experience of this whole question of brotherhood and sisterhood. That was not the case. To us, there was a lot of animosity from the people that surrounded Chavez and a lot of his members of his community in our life. We were not treated well, we were not treated as we were being welcomed. So the bottom line is that with time, I began to see things and feel things. And it was then that I was befriended by Larry Itliong. And Larry came to me and says, don't leave, because we're going to leave, and some of us, and we didn't like the whole idea, even if we went back independent, but we didn't like what we saw. So the bottom line is that what happens is that Larry and I began that relationship. And while we're doing the picketing and doing the organizing of the fields, every once in a while we go eat at the little Main Street, Filipino Community Main Street, you know, where you have the restaurants, Filipino community restaurants, and some bingo and some gambling. So he talked to me a lot. He said, "Al, don't leave." He says that I've been feeling this, what you're feeling, even worse than that. They've ostracized me. They pushed me aside. They want me to leave. They want me to quit. They want me to do this. And little by little, I began to see it, the reality, that there was this unhealthy and unwelcome, you guys are over there, we're over here. A lot of people today don't want to talk about that because, and I'll tell you this, and Nick and I, my brother here, we talked about it. Who was to blame? We were to blame. We were to blame because we didn't challenge him. We believed him to be what this group of priests and ministers that surrounded him. Nothing against some white people, but most of them white people, okay? And yes, they could get money and they could talk to the churches, but there was this surrounding him where it's difficult to get to. You almost have to make an appointment with him to talk to him. And I was one to be very vocal and said, listen, I want to talk to Chavez, I need to talk to him. Well, you got to come later, he's too busy. I said, bullshit. I'm just going to walk into his office and say I'm going to talk to him, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be treated in this manner. So anyway, little by little, I was more and more convinced, and Larry and I continued the whole thing. Larry's thing was, don't leave out, stick, man, stick, because we need to stick together. We need to change this union in the direction it's heading. It's heading to death. It's not heading to anywhere where it's going to give the workers the right, from the rank and file, the right to be able to control their union. The workers themselves. And that's when we started, this whole thing of, hanging in there. And then the crisis came with this whole question of the violence. The growers called it the violence, the courts called it the violence, everybody called it the violence. But it wasn't that, it was the powers of the the sheriff and the DA and the courts and the politicians all came down and trying to do whatever they can to accuse us. And at one point I think they met with us, the attorneys, and they said, they put the fear of God in us because they said, well, we met with all these attorneys from Kern County, Tulare County, and Kings County. And they all got evidence and they got pictures of some of you, and they're going to incriminate us all. Whether it was true or not, we don't know. This is only attorneys telling us that BS. So the bottom line is that they were trying to convince us that we were culpable, and we were saying, hey, we have no control if workers are pissed off because they're on strike, or they're not working, or they're even helping us inside, that they were burning barns and they were doing this, destroying caterpillars or tractors or whatever. We have no control over that. The anger is there already. The violence is there with what's happening with wages and working conditions in the homes and the kids not being able to get an education. So all that, came to be where one day Chavez calls everybody in and says, lock the doors in the Filipino Hall. I don't know if Brother Nick was there. He was there. And he was not happy. But at the same time, it was only him speaking. Everybody was there. I don't think, right, Nick, there was more than 80 people there.
What about that?
80 people. And I said to my wife, what is this? She said, yeah, what is this? And people got emotional because what he began to say is talk about this violence. And he said, I want to tell you that I'm on a fast right now. And after I'm done here, I'm going to walk to the 40 acres and take my dogs with me. I don't want anybody to follow me. I'm going to go on a fast and go hide in this damn garage or gasoline station. I said, is that me? What the heck, So, okay, so you're going to walk out. And people are crying, and all this stuff, they're emotional. Who can blame them, But I said, is this the UFW now? Have we forgotten that it's not us, damn it? It's the workers out there? Where are they? Has he called the county meeting? Excuse me. I was really, really pissed. My wife was even more angry. She kept saying, you see, we should have left a long time ago. Get the hell out of here. Well, that night, Leroy comes knocking, Leroy Chadwell, my house at the door at 12:30 at night. He says, nothing, of my conviction. Okay? He was crying. Emotional, too. He wanted to be a minister or something, a Catholic priest. I don't know. But he's one of the close associates. Good man. He believed in the movement. He good heart. But he was not a worker. Nor was Marshall Gans a worker. Nor did he come from the working class. Some of us were, or I was at least, a worker at one point. Came out of the fields. Some never did. But they're good organizers. And they come from, at one time from the working sector workers. So the bottom line, he said, what are we going to do? I said, shit, man, you come in and knock the door down. You want to get in and want to go to sleep? Who gives a rat's ass? You know, don't you understand? He has not gone to the workers. So we got the task of, my idea is go out and tell the workers, this is what this guy's saying. And we were going to talk about, well, you know, we're against the, you know, the fast, because we were too damn loyal. We felt we were going to hurt the movement. We were wrong. We should have said no. And I think I got up after he left, and when we should have said, no, you stay until you hear us. And I got up and I said, this is bullshit. And that's when Leroy came and said, and I don't think he came because he really liked what I said. He came because he knew that I was going to start trouble. Okay? And that's when I told him, I said, no, we're going to go, I don't know about you. You can go home and cry all you want. But tomorrow we're going out to the fields and tell people, we got to fight. If he wants to starve over there, we got to fight. Let him know, whatever. That's how the fast started. All that is in my book in much more detail. But I'm saying I'm not putting my brother Nick on the spot. But anyway, from there we went to the boycott. We won the boycott, and we came back. Things got worse, really bad. And Larry came to me and said, "You know what, Al? This is bullshit." Because there was already internal fight of what my brother here said at the hiring hall. I was a hiring hall director in Poplar. We fought with Chavez about we don't know how to do the hiring hall. We need to understand from people who have that familiarity and that experience of what a hiring hall really means is the power of the workers. We're being challenged that some of the organizers who were assigned to these offices have got the wrong idea. They were allowing the growers to dictate as to who came to work and who didn't come to work. What the hell's a hiring hall? Then came this whole question of the seniority. All of us know that the Filipinos and all the ethnic groups, even the Mexicans, they have a migrant path of a system of how they obtained their seniority way before the union came on. My argument was, if we at least allowed them to give us their input, maybe we would know how best to deal with and make them part of the committee of, this whole thing. We were in a transition movement of something we didn't know what the hell we were doing. Okay? Making mistake. Took the Filipinos. They never work individually, at least in the grapes or the asparagus. I'll just point on those. They work in little groups of cells because they knew who they were and they had their own little group, as a crew, and they did not want anybody, even if it was another Filipino member of the work site, to enter that group, because they were on the piece rate basis, and they knew who was going to really move, and those that didn't move didn't fit in. So what we did is we destroyed with that hiring hall and said, "No, I'm sorry, you brought." One of the Filipino crew leaders came into my office and he said, "Well, why are you sending me dispatch to people?" And I hadn't seen it until I said, "Well, and he explained it to me." So I went out to the fields and talked to the crews. I said, "Holy shit, this is even worse than I thought." So the following meeting, we called a meeting with Chavez and the group. We had big blogs. Big arguments. Hey, this is not working. At least in this type of crew, even some of the Mexicans who had work crews. When we had a dispatch, it was a mess. We had 300-400 people waiting to be dispatched to ranches, and guess who else was there? Some of the people that had seniority, that went back way before the union was founded. They were associate members. They wanted to take those good paying jobs because of the hard work and the volume and that they produce for the grower and the speed, okay? So it created turmoil throughout the valley. Like one day, one of the brothers came in so angry, when he slammed the door, he smashed the window of the door. He was so mad.
Was that Pete?
No, I got his name. But anyway, what I'm doing is give you an example, a little in that area. But the bottom line is that little by little, there was dissension. And the reason for that, I think, is that we weren't listening. We weren't allowing people to come, forward and being a part of that, up in La Paz, not Delano, up in La Paz, to everybody go up there. Well, who was everybody? Was that the crew leaders? Was that the crew leaders and members and all that? No. Maybe a few, but there was always this Chavez getting up and saying, that ain't gonna work. That's not the way it's gonna go down. So everybody went, okay. They call him the jefe, whatever the jefe says, So, anyway, it got to the point of where, I'm going to say this, some people are going to say, what did you do, Rojas? After the 1973, and I spent some time as his personal aide for over a year with Chavez in the office, opened up my eyes to many, many things that was going on. And Larry was still really upset. He was basically back in Delano at the 40 acres. Some of us really questioned, why are we up here? If it's a training center, fine. And the workers come up here, fine. It's an educational, fine. But why are we not in Delano? Why is it that you want the workers or leaders and job stewards to be able to not come up here as much as they should when we should be down there and the meeting should be down there. So there was a complete disconnect between the rank and file. And there's this hierarchy up here that decided what was good and best. I'm taking too much time. Okay. So what happens is that we have the first convention. I remember the first convention. So what happened to the very first one in the first place? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. There was never any conventions. So now the election comes up. By this time, I think 1973, Larry's sick. Okay, very, very sick. At least in talking, and he wasn't gonna say I'm sick and I'm in pain. He's a man with a lot of courage, as we all know, and he stood his ground. And he stood his ground. And of course, when some of the leadership with Chavez, and he moved on, including him, went to the Philippines to visit, invitation with Marcos, because we understand with the CIA and cohort with the aid program, which the AFL-CIO supported. And of course, Chavez was, castigated outright by Philip. And I talked to Philip. I said, Philip, tell me the politics in the Philippines. I don't understand. He said, oh, shit. Did you guys have a meeting on this? He said, you can't meet with the man and you can't do this. And Larry said the same thing. He said, the thing's out of hand, man. He dictates whatever the hell. All these people follow him on that. So anyway, after the 73 and the killings, 2 killings in Arvin and Lamont, and I think a couple in Santa Maria, Guadalupe, what happens is that Chavez prepares everybody, and after the funeral, he told everybody, just after the funeral there in Harvard, I want everybody to go up there to La Paz in my office. I want to meet with all of you and talk to you about some important things. So we went up there, and bottom line, the discussion was about the convention and the slate, who's going to be on the slate. So he talked to all of us, and he got to me, he said, Al, you know, we treated you this way and that way when you came in, you've been here all these years, I'm considering you to be on my slate. I said, why? He said, well, you've done a lot of good work. Okay. So anyway, I told my wife, I told a couple of people, he said, don't tell anybody. What do you mean, don't tell anybody? What, I mean, are you telling me that, well, I said, are you afraid of Dolores? Are you afraid of this? Are you afraid of that person? Was I click? Oh, well, why are you saying that? I said, God damn it. I said, because that's the way you are. And he looked at me like, see, I challenged them in the boycott in Chicago when he came after, you know, Salinas, 1973, was on strike, and apparently they're on strike, but he kept saying, well, we might win it, you know. And they had us boycotters out there looking at banana chiquita banana, what they call the Inner Harvest, and this company out of South America, U.S. corporation. So anyway, the bottom line is that he said, I wanna just tell you, be careful, don't tell anybody. I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. You gotta take it. So anyway, I went up, you know, I went up north. There was servicing the contracts up north. And bottom line, what he says is, he called me up and said, you're out of the picture. I said, who? Dolores got pissed off at you? Well, you know what? Take it and shove it up your ass. Over the phone. I was pissed because I said, here's another betrayal. But in Chicago, I told him, I want to ask you a question. He said, anybody have questions? Nobody asked questions. I got up and said, I believe what you just finished telling us is you're wrong. Oh, I can see his jaws clench. And he's dark, you know, he's already dark. Turning purple. And everybody's looking at me, you idiot, you know. And I said, hey, shit. He said, go on now. He said, well, first of all, you said that the boycott is real expensive, we're spending a lot of money. Shit, we're sending you 13,000, 20,000 a month. What the hell are you, my question is, what the hell are you doing with money? Aside from what you're getting on the strike order. Anyway, you're wrong because we're not leaving because we've got a tremendous, you know, power with the boycott. And basically when we left Delano, the strike was lost. It was lost. Some people may argue with me, but I'm putting that, and I put that in the book. Now when I mean lost, I mean at that point there could have been a comeback, but there was no more organizing after that. The only option was the boycott. Well, after 2.5 years, that was the result of that Chicago meeting, and he kept calling me while he was fasting again in Salinas. He says, where are you? Why in the hell aren't you here? I said, you know what, I told you already, I'm not going back. Send me the lettuce workers. It's going to be October, goddammit. It's going to be snowing here. We can transition them in. Once we allow the boycotters to leave, goodbye. Okay? Well, I find it that. And that other story about me working with him is the, you know. But I think what happens after that, so I ran against his slave. And I went to Philip, and I said, Philip, I'm gonna run. He said, I want you to pull back. I want you to join my, I'm trying to see if I can get our own slave. We should build our own slave. And by this time, Larry was not too active in because of the stress and all that, I think. So the bottom line is I made a wrong tactical decision. I ran against him. I'll be honest. Because I wanted him to come on, and I wasn't using my right. I should have ran against Marshall, who was not a farmer. Okay? Didn't ever come out of the fields, pick the grape. But what happens is that I run, and Chavez got really angry. Really angry. He sent his people to try to threaten me with violence in my family. They're throwing paper and throwing trash at my family. My wife would left the convention floor crying. Anyway, all these things are but little small things, but they were meaningful things, the signs of what was happening internally about the control of who controls the union. Okay? And what democracy there was in the union. And that we had formed those committees in the ranches so they could become the leaders and they should be running. And I said, Chavez in the convention, he said, those workers should be the leaders in this union. So history tells us now that what's happened now is that the unions become corporate. Corporate tied to the Democratic Party. Kissing ass with regards to legislation that's going to organize workers. When Chavez himself said, when the LRB was signed off, labor laws are not going to organize workers. This is the death of the union, just like the NLRB. We organize, we mobilize, we strike, and we boycott. In the end, it's the economics. So, now, as I said earlier, we have the UFW today. When I see this, well, you know, maybe the film, you know, I don't know how many people saw it, but yeah, maybe it was a good because a lot of young kids today don't know what happened back then. But to me, it was another Hollywood movie. It didn't talk about Larry, didn't talk about Andy, didn't talk about Pete, didn't talk about Julio, didn't really allow, you know, the people who wanted to say something about the dark side. As the screenwriter said, oh, we don't want to go to the dark side. Well, that was obvious who controlled the screenplay. So the bottom line is that that film does not depict what it should depict. And many of the media, because I was in Mexico City when they premiered it, and I was working with the labor movement there, the teachers union, and electrical workers, they asked me, what's going on? Why are these guys leaving? Well, the UFW has already opened up offices in the state of Michoacan. What for? Importation of Mexican nationals. Braceros.
Could you repeat the title of that film?
Cesar Chavez. It's a commercial movie.
Okay.
So anyway, who did they sign with? And in Mexico right now, you mentioned that you're a member of the PRI, the political party, Revolutionary Party, or the Conservative Party, Action Party, or even the PRD, the Revolutionary Party that's supposed to be left. They all sold out. There's hate. And what is there now today? There's the movement to fight back. That in this country, the UFW, doing what they're doing, is now working with the so-called, now we want to sign up workers up in Washington State. They have been for the last 6 years, and Oregon State, guest workers. What are they doing? Collecting union dues. Oh. Workers come, workers leave. And now, Arturo Rodriguez, he's a nice guy. He spent his time in the union, you know, as a maybe volunteer at one point, and then became staff after Chavez died. We get money with the contracts, you know, and we won, especially after we won the boycott. So now they're earning $100,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
And their kids are earning $100,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
And now more than the majority of the executive board, they never went to pick a grape in the fields. I joke with the fact that Arturo Rodriguez on Facebook, oh yeah, your president that's never picked a damn grape out of the fields other than he picks it out of the refrigerator? Is that your leader? Maybe he's sarcastic and they say, Al Rojas just wants to attack us. is our personal attacks. I said, no. It's about being accountable. I'm accountable, you're accountable, and we're responsible to the working class. That's what it's about. We are not the leaders, they are the leaders. So what's happened now is that we have Budweiser in that film puts out a national commercial. Here's the, you know those big horses? Where there's lucky this damn beer wagon? Driving around there 40 acres making all this dust. Budweiser is here with Cesar Chavez and celebrating the movie. Here comes the clips. All the workers there and our families watching Cesar Chavez after the movies. And you know when the movie's on? They're drinking beer, watching the movie. And at the same time, they're interviewing the guy and says, what do you like about the unions movie? Great, people Cesar Chavez. I said, and then after that, his son, Paul, they asked him, well, Mr. Chavez, what did you think about your dad, about Budweiser? Oh, my dad always drank Budweiser beer. He always drank Budweiser beer. I said, what bullshit. I used to bring him wine from Napa Valley, and I know they only drank wine, at least, maybe in the beginning at People's Pool Hall, remember? People's Pool Hall, he drank some beer there, but after he changed it to wine, got more sophisticated again. But anyway, where's the mistake? We were the mistake. And who paid the price? The workers. Today, the conditions are worse today than they were back then, even though they were worse back then. And now, what's really important, there's something happening, and the UFW is very quiet. In San Quintin, 5 hours from the Mexican border, the Driscoll Corporation, Strawberry Corporation, the biggest worldwide international distributorship of vegetables and row crop and strawberries that control the Oxnard, Ventura County, and Salinas Valley in strawberries. And do you hear the UFW? Oh, yes, we're going to put a little petition on our webpage. But no one says, boycott. We're going to boycott. We're going to send people out and help you guys. Washington State, the Sakuma farm workers, 400 or 500 of them, out on strike just the other day. Since March 17th of 2013, they called for a boycott. You have done it in quiet. March 17th of last year, 63,000 workers in San Quintin who used to work up here and got deported, now live in San Quintin, not working because they're not going to come back again. So they are striking. There goes, they send an emissary, the UFW. We're with you. We're going to put up a little petition on our webpage. So what do? Us in the independent movement, at least what little we have around, with our committees throughout the whole state and, other states in the union, we call for a boycott. In the U.S. Only because the workers in Sakuma have said, we want you guys to help us. We're calling for a boycott on Driscoll and Sakuma products up in Washington State, and now there's in San Quintin, in Baja California. We went to them. What do you want us to do? Help us. What about the UFW? Well, we don't hear much from them. Okay. And then finally, it ends up that we're now engaged in, I think, one of the most important battles right now is I don't know of any other right now. I don't know of any other right now with the corporate attack that we have right now by the imperialist capitalists in this country that are now subjugating us to another NAFTA and CAFTA and TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, another beginning of enslavement and the destruction of the middle class. And unless we push the AFL-CIO The fight back, in my opinion, and SEIU, 13% right now, I think 6.8% public employees, 6.7 private employees in the private sector. If we didn't have the emerging organizing public sector, right now the AFL-CIO had no more than 7% organized in this country. And my brother can tell you probably it was about 30%. I'm going to stop here, and I want to apologize for taking so long, but I can't say anymore because there's more, and I'm just going to tire the hell out of you guys.
I think with both Howard and Al, we could spend a week with them just talking, right? Because all you have seen from the UFW now is just the promotion and the propaganda of the Chavez cult. And that's what it became, and that's what it is. It is a cult. And so for him to speak honestly, it's a very, let me tell you, it's a very courageous thing. I'm up against them as well. They're still there defending that cult image of Chavez, and that's something that we have to push back on, and I'll explain very, very briefly why. You saw the picture there, right, of the Filipino Community Hall. That's in Delano, and of course that's where the strike vote was taken to walk out. And in the beginning, of course, it was predominantly Filipino. Within a week, of course, the Filipino leadership went to Chavez, went to Padilla and Huerta, asking them to join. Don't scab, don't cross our picket lines, but join us. In fact, from the accounts that we understood, that really it was the workers. At that point, Chavez was not really the recognized leader. And the workers unanimously voted, we're going to join in the strike. And that's when it began, when the strike expanded. But there's a very interesting, and I want all of you to turn to page 20. This picture really tells you what transpired. It tells you how the United Farm Workers became a shooting star and just fizzled out. What happened within the labor movement. So look closely at this picture, and I'm going to tell you for my very brief presentation, you're going to have 3D glasses. Okay? 3D glasses. Just like Al, when you're living and you're part of that history, sometimes you don't really comprehend what's happening around you. You don't. It takes years to go back and analyze it and ponder it and say, what was the significance of that? What was the meaning of that? Why did it happen and how did it happen? So when I see that picture, it becomes clear to me what happened. Okay? So let's get on our 3D glasses. Howard gave a very good beginning on that presentation. We know we live in a class society. We know that we are ruled, right? We're not the ruling class, not here. The capitalists, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, right? They rule over us, the capitalists. The middle class, well now they're getting more squeezed out. We can see that, mom and pop stores. Yeah, they're squeezed out. Physicians no longer having a private practice. They're having to work for the big HMOs, right? They're getting squeezed out. So that middle class is getting smaller, but guess what? The working class is getting bigger. That's what's happening. But just the same, right now, we're losing that class war. We're losing. Capital is flowing back into the inner cities and displacing mostly people of color, workers, right? Our working class neighborhoods, Mission District, Bernal Heights, all of these, they're getting very, well, the term, of course, is gentrified, but what's happening is the upper strata of the working class is moving back in from the suburbs. Okay, so that's flow of capital coming back in. So we see many, you know, the capitalists are, right, they're right on our necks, and they're doing everything they can to keep us down and keep their foot on our necks. So let's look at this picture very closely. I'm sorry I had it on. But you'll see that there are 3 figures in this picture, okay? There's Chavez. Chavez is on the right. Walter Reuther, AFL-CIO, he's in the center. And who's the left?
Larry.
Larry Itliong. Okay. What happens is that the AFL, of course, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, of course, was an AFL-CIO. It was, I think that you'll see how joyous Itliong looks in that photo. Chavez is not looking very happy, is he? He's looking quite uncertain of the future. But Itliong seems very clearly overjoyed. He felt that we were going to make that we were going to break through. After years, just think about it. Filipinos had been organizing, unionizing, struggling to get collective bargaining rights for all agricultural workers since the 20s. We succeeded in Hawaii. We succeeded in part in Alaska. But the West Coast, confronting agribusiness, especially in the Central Valley, that was the toughest fight. That's the hardest fight. And finally, I think Itliong and the other Filipino leadership, they thought, this is our breakthrough. This is it. We're going to get a workers' union, an agricultural workers' union. Finally, all those who work in agriculture in this country are going to have a rank and file union to represent them, to protect them, and to advance their rights. But in that center, the AFL-CIO already set a path that was going to undermine that labor struggle. So what did the AFL-CIO? First of all, they realized, of course Reuther realized, oh, we're going to put someone who's had a communist background in charge? No. They weren't going to let the left take leadership. No way. So you pick up this book, and I really, really encourage you to read this book. What happens is that Reuther and his, it's not Reuther actually, but it's an AFL-CIO official. They have Chavez and his folks sit down. They have Itliong and Vera Cruz and the others sit down. And they pose it in a very subtle way. Well, you know, Mexicans are the majority. Why don't you let Chavez? Let Chavez, okay? You cooperate with him, you're second leadership. Go ahead. Filipinos, we took a bad concession. We allowed that. We did not know who Chavez really was at that point. And like I said, my family, we were in Coachella when that first strike happened. Among all the workers, Itliong, Ben Gimes, they were clearly leaders. If a vote had been taken, right then, Itliong would have been clearly in leadership. Chavez would not have been. But you see, no election was ever held. None. Chavez was basically maneuvered in, and the workers accepted it. And it became an alignment of forces. Here you have the AFL. Guess who comes in next? The Democratic Party. Guess who comes in next? the Kennedy family, they all collude and they all built Chavez into what he became. It's like, it's just the way that they developed the Camelot, right? Kennedy, JFK's myth of Camelot. Was he really Camelot? Come on. No, anybody who knew him personally, no. Well, that's the very same spin that they put on Chavez. And unfortunately, Chavez believed it. And he became an egomaniac. He really did. And I'll just share very clearly what happened. Just like Al, I began to see what was happening in the Union Hall. I lived with the Itliong family just prior to his resignation. And I was very young, but I know what I saw. And like I said, you can see things and not clearly comprehend it. You can question it and not truly understand, but it bothers you. There's something wrong here. It took me a while to figure it out. But I remember coming into the hall and the meetings would be going on, and we grew up, all the Filipino kids growing up, we knew all the labor camps, Filipinos, we had our labor camps, we had our community halls. We grew up in those halls, we grew up in those camps, so we knew. So when I'm in the meetings, it's all in Spanish. Oh. And Chavez is sitting in the center, and Itliong's pushed to the far end of the table, and Vera Cruz is at the other end. And I said, wait a minute, that doesn't look right to me. And I remember when Itliong was heading back to the kitchen, and I stopped him and I said, how come they're all speaking in Spanish? Don't they see the Filipinos here? Why is that? Like I said, I didn't really know Chavez. He never came down to Coachella Valley and Imperial Valley to organize. I didn't know him. So why? And growing up Filipino in the old way, you can ask a question of your elders, and they'll look at you, and it's like, when I have the answer, I'll give you. So I remember him looking down at me, nodding, and kept walking. And I thought about it, bothered, and I know that Itliong was very bothered during that time. I know he used to just, let's get in the car and we drive around Delano, and he'd point out places where he'd like to have the retirement home built for the older Filipinos once they retired. And it was happy talking, and I could, I think it was part of him holding on that's what had to be done. Another instance, I remember, he told me to go with the older Filipinos, Manong George, and to go up to Sacramento, that Governor Reagan at that time had agreed to meet, had agreed to talk to us. And I remember, we're sitting there, and then Reagan comes in, and he doesn't even talk. He talks at us. Have you ever been at one of those? Very politically staged. He talks at us. We're not allowed to talk. We're just there, and they're taking pictures and the like. And it's like, don't we get a chance to ask Reagan any questions? And it's like this very slick presentation. Oh, I do this and this and this and that, and I hope you enjoy your stay at the Capitol. And he just walks out. And we're there to talk about, banning the short hoe, the cortido, right? We're there to talk about getting the growers to stop using it. And so I remember everyone was like, really? What was this thing about? I mean, we traveled all the way from Delano to hear this guy. Like, what are we wasting? So anyway, we get back to Delano, and Itliong asked me, well, how did it go in Sacramento? And I'm young, and I'm saying it was a waste of time. A waste of time. Why are we there begging these politicians for something that we can do? If we don't want to use the short hoe, Let's not use it. Get our own long haul. If the growers don't like the long haul, hey, we're the ones doing the work. Okay? We're not going to use it. That's it. He got, Itliong would just tease me and say, oh, you're going to be our young Filipino organizer. You're going to be our organizer. But, it was just that anger that I felt. And at that age, what I saw happening in the UFW was not what I knew a workers' organization, workers' union had to be. We had to fight. And what was being presented and what I saw was not it. And I know it saddened him when I told him I was going back, and he gives you the same lecture everybody does, go back and finish college, and it saddened me to leave, but I felt that, I think though he knew I was going in the right direction. He knew, just like him, at that age that I was, I was going to be part of the left movement, just like him. And I would eventually find the same political orientation that he did. So, but when I share that, I also wanted to share that what I later learned and what really hurt him the most was all those decades of struggling and trying to build that workers' organization, that trade union. It was, at the end to escape him, to become elusive. I think that was really what hurt him the very, very most. And what he tried to do at the very end, of course, was to work to build that retirement center. And as you know, Chavez and his faction completely grabbed the credit for it, and made it something that it should not have been. If you go to Delano and you see where the Agbayani village is, how many of you been there?
I have.
Where is it? What is next to the Agbayani village?
UFW headquarters.
No. Look to the north. What is north of the Agbayani village?
Isn't it Voice of America?
Well, that's part of it. It's the Delano town dump. It's the dump. Take a look. When you make that turn, you're passing the dump, and then you get to Agbayani. But the real hurtful thing, I think, that Chavez did was that he put it out, and it's Filipinos, and everybody says, out in the boonies. In the boonies. I mean, if you're getting old, why would you retire out in the middle of nowhere? No. When you're old, you need to be in town, and that's what Itliong had said. We drive around, and he said, oh, that's a good place for the retirement center that, closed. And for him to put it there. And I've talked to a lot of folks, and, they say, oh, I've been there, I worked on that, and I thought, we were tricked. I must tell you, we were tricked. But those who had no other place in the older Filipinos, once Itliong was gone, once he resigned, that was their only, the only way. Like I told you, agricultural workers, we had no rights. Okay, as I tell everybody, when I started working with my family and Filipinos, we worked as crews. We worked with other families. Some of the older men joined our crews that came down from Delano and Arvin and Bakersfield. We formed our crews. But when we worked, like I said, it was like every season, it was a big fight. What are they going to pay us this season? And then find out they're paying the Mexicans more than they're paying us. Find out that, it's a constant battle with these big growers, right? So I packed when we were picking grapes up in Mecca. In those days, like I said, there was no minimum wage. you had to fight every season for what the growers would be giving you, right? And the growers, all the big growers from the Central Valley, they already talked among themselves at the club, at the golf club or whatever, and they fixed the price. I mean, they fixed our wages, right? There was also no work day. So you came when they told you to show up to start picking grapes, and you stayed there until they, you know, they would tell you to just go home. And I remember, you know, usually it's one of their sons or whoever that tells you, right? I remember we worked for the Bianchi family, and they had one of their sons. He was anyway. He'd come in this huge white Eldorado Cadillac, right? Step out, and you know, he was the one who was directing the crew. And I remember one time, you know, we had gone out there. This was basically the last time I think any Filipino worked for the Bianchis. But anyway, I remember once that it was like maybe about 10 o'clock. We had gotten there like 4:30 in the morning to start because it's so hot, right? I mean, the temperature's going to go up probably over 100, 110, right? So we start very early. And we're just, you know, picking along and packing, you know, we're an all Filipino crew. And all of a sudden we see the Cadillac coming down and a big truck behind it. And I said, we're not ready to load up. What's the truck for? Because I'm sitting at the end of the road, my sisters are picking and the others, and I'm packing. And all of a sudden he gets out of his Cadillac and he starts yelling at us, go home. And I look at my uncle and I said, go home? What's wrong? And just then, this whole, I mean, it's a flatbed, and there's all these young Mexican guys. And it's like, you know, everything starts going in slow motion as you realize you're getting replaced. You just got fired, but nobody told you. And, you know, you can't, you know, they're just like us. They're as poor as we are. They need to work just as we are. And I remember my uncle didn't say anything. None of the older Filipinos said anything. Just go back to the camp. But that was a year for our strike because they were so, they were so dirty and so cruel. And you know, my uncle always used to tell us about when he grew up, when he was working in the plantations in Hawaii, life was cheap. I didn't understand that, and you know, that's one good thing about how I grew up. I never had to ask my parents, how was it for you growing up? I never had to ask them because I knew. When I worked with them, I knew what their life was, and I knew who was responsible for making our life miserable and hard. So, like I said, the one thing that I did learn was the United Farm Workers did not become the union that we had dreamed, that we had struggled and we had fought for. And there were many forces that were in our path that diverted us, that undermined us, including, unfortunately, the AFL-CIO. From the very beginning, they wanted dues-paying members, but they didn't want a militant rank and file. They wanted followers. That's all they wanted of us, and we weren't willing. So let me just read this because I really, for those of you who really don't know the history of the United Farmers, like I said, these two men, they're a wealth of information. I mostly know more of the Filipino experience. And, you know, it's a difficult battle that's happening within the Filipino community right now. Because unfortunately, many of the Filipino academics, really, right, do not want to hear this history do not want to accept it, and in fact are going along with the Chavez faction, the Chavez Foundation, the Huerta Foundation, the UFW. They're going along with that big lie that once we got in the union, everything was great. It wasn't. They threw us out as soon as Chavez could consolidate his power. And like Al said, as soon as they could, you know, as soon as they got hold of the union hiring hall, and I'm sure that, like Howard said, at the behest of the growers, at the behest of the AFL, they set up a union hall that bust our Filipino crews up. They did that. They did that with the intent of driving us out. And they did. By the time that Itliong resigned, no, you know, my brothers and the guys that grew up, they were the last of the lattice crew, Filipino work crews, traveling nationwide. They were the last of the crews. They refused. They refused to join the UFW. They joined the Teamsters, which was, you know, painful, but, you know, and that's another place that, again, you're under attack. The Teamsters came in, if anybody, and I'm telling you, you got to read the book. The Teamsters came in when Nixon sat down with, who was it, Fitzsimmons? Or his representative, and said, okay, we'll get the IRS off your back. You get in there and you start raiding the UFW. I mean, do you understand what workers go through? The powers to be have every which way to attack us, to undermine us. And that's what they did. So in the end, you know, before he left, Itliong says very briefly, he says, in an interview with the Fresno Bee, Itliong says, I don't have any problem with Caesar. As far as I'm concerned, I have the greatest admiration for him. I'm not quitting to make things harder for him. But I'm unhappy with the group of intellectuals who form a brain trust around him. All you can say is that the thinking of these people does not relate to the thinking of the workers, and Brother Chavez is with them day in and day out. Instead of trying to understand the problems of the farm workers, Chavez is swayed by the grandiose thinking of these people who have created this monster organization on behalf of the farm workers. On behalf. I don't know how I could say it any other way. But that's what he began. That's the beginning of the end for Itliong. He knew that this was not going to be a union. And he resigned at that time. But sometimes I look back and I think I hope that my questions and my anger at what I saw, I hope that helped poke him. You know, the only regret that I felt is that he didn't talk to me more on a political level of trying to delve deeply and understand the forces that were working. I think maybe he didn't think I was politically mature enough to understand. I eventually did. So there's another book, and this book, let me tell you, you really need to read, because it really, I mean, it's going to shock you. I mean, when I read it, it got me so sick to my stomach that the UFW can actually stand up and say they're going to have a celebration. In the book, it talks about, well, with Itliong, they just flatly just refused to pay him, right, to support himself, right? And that's basically what, and of course they started to not allow him in, they started having secret meetings, the Chavez faction. Then the set with Vera Cruz, it was, you talk about vicious, you talk about ugly, you read what they did to Vera Cruz to get him out of the UFW. And this is a man who had been loyal, I mean, faithful, and worked for so many years for barely nothing. And then to be turned on I'm telling you, you need to read this. And then you'll get a sense of what the United Farmers had become. And that was just before, right? I'm sorry, that was just after, no, I'm sorry, that was just after Chavez had gone to the Philippines. Now, there's another little interesting thing about that. The CIO, as you know, Imutan came out, was not an agriculture worker. You know, in every place, in every picture, you always look for the right, the center, and the left. The Filipino leadership that we knew, that we grew up with, did not include Imutan. Imutan came to this country in 1965, landed in Los Angeles as a business person, then comes up to the Central Valley and gets a position with the AFL-CIO. Interesting. The strike comes on, he comes down, it's part of comes around to the Filipino Community Hall. He's got an interesting role that I think we need to look more into. He's the one who convinced Chavez to go to the Philippines to talk and to befriend, actually, Marcos. He was so I've heard folks say he was the operative. He was the agent within, that once they got all the militant, all the left Filipinos out, he would be the last Filipino standing. And he was. So what's his true role? I think we can dig and we can probably figure out, but we do know what the results of that relationship with Chavez was, Imutan's. Yeah. But like I said, that's the difficulty right now, is that there's a very narrow nationalist perspective among many Filipino academics and historians. They want to see Filipinos all the same. They don't want to understand that there are class differences between us. There's a worker's perspective, and there's a middle class, and there's a ruling class perspective. In fact, I went to a presentation at San Francisco State last year. I don't know, did any of you attend this? This was held by the Labor Archives and the like. Anyone? Well, there was two things that came out. One is that the film director, Marissa Arroy, and she was there with Juanita Tamayo-Lot. Somebody in the audience asked them, well, you know, how is it for Filipino farm workers now? What do you think their response was?
What?
What do you think their response was?
Still the same.
Yes.
You said you're not a Filipino.
Right. They said, there's no more Filipinos in the fields. We're all professionals now. Oh.
Yeah, right.
I tried to talk, right? And that's why I brought you some grapes. These are picked by Filipinos. These are picked by us. We are still working in the fields. We are still going from Delano and Stockton to work in the canneries in Alaska every year. We're still there. We're not unionized. There's nothing to join right now. There's no agricultural workers union for us. So I tried to speak, and guess what? They called the security on me. Dan Gonzalez called security on me. So I filed a complaint with California State, and I asked him, I want to know why. Look at this letter it sent me saying, why? Who do you think are they naming all those who colluded and conspired to gag me, to not allow me to talk? I told San Francisco State, I'm filing a complaint of discrimination. You tell me who these people are. I have the right to know why I don't have freedom of speech on a university campus. I got an idea who they are. So I just want to bring this back to what our presentation is, because right now in the Filipino community, unfortunately, you go down there to Delano just like we did last year, Filipinos are going to be there is the song and dance part of the program. And it's disgusting. But that unfortunately is our level of consciousness and our level of understanding of what happened in the agricultural work of our struggle to build the union. It got diverted, it got undermined, in the end it got destroyed. But we have, people like Al and I, we just keep going. I mean, we have to. We have family that still work. We come from rural communities, and we know how difficult life is still. It's as bad, like Al says. 1965, when I was picking grapes, my relatives picking grapes, there's been no change. We're still at starvation wages. We're still having to live how many people in one house to make the mortgage. We're still living in the same way. We don't have the labor camps, that's true. It's too bad we don't. But those conditions that gave rise to the 1965 Grape Strike, they're there. And rather than joining that celebration for the UFW, I think it's time for us to pay attention to the workers. They're gearing up. The tomato workers in Mendota, they walked off, tried to call the UFW, please help us. We don't do that. Sakuma workers call the UFW, I'll tell you what happened. They don't do that. They're not there to help organize the agricultural workers. So that's our challenge again. We have the same challenge that we had in 1965. How do we revitalize? How do we rebuild the labor movement? And most importantly, what do we learn? What do we learn? And that's why I say, I look at this picture a lot. I say, what do we learn? Right? As we go about, and like I tell you, it's building and building. There's more and more, walkouts, strikes that are happening. And what's going to be very different, and I will tell you, is that this time it's not going to be just a union here. Capital has jumped the border. Those workers and U.S. workers, we are now going to have to be joined. If we're going to find Driscoll in Mexico and Driscoll in Watsonville, the same corporation, you're not going to just strike on the U.S. side and not on the Mexican side. It doesn't work. We're the same workers, the same agricultural labor force now. We have been collapsed into that. So we have a big challenge, but like I said, this time I think it is going to be the Mexican workers. They are very politically advanced. I think they're going to take the lead this time, and I think we're going to they're militant. I mean, if you look at what the Sakuma workers doing, the workers in San Quentin, let them say that we're violent. They're the ones who use state violence, against us. But the change, like I said, the movement is moving among agricultural workers. And this time, we're not going to allow the center to dictate who's going to, be the role, who's going to be our leader. And we're not certainly going to allow the right to come in. It's going to be clearly a rank and file union. Clearly.
Before we get into the questions and discussion from the floor, I just want to make a point. This book was published only about a year and a half ago. And I was quite surprised that Mary Jane hadn't read it. So about 2 months ago, I gave her the book. I talked to her on the phone the next day, and her voice was very soft. She could barely speak. What happened to you, Mary Jane?
I was up all night reading the book.
There's a lot of inside information in here. It's one of the better expositions of what happened inside the UFW. And the author, who was an academic and started out actually with great admiration for Cesar Chavez, ended up writing a totally different book. But anyway, he had unusual access to what happened inside the Union. I urge you to read it. It'll really equip you to understand this issue.
Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
A lot of the communist and anarchist-led organizing that I've seen in the Bay Area in the short time that I've been around has been what I've called parachute organizing, which is where like you get a bunch of people and they try to intersect a bunch of workers and hand them a flyer, and like the attention span lasts about a week or so. A lot of the organizing that happened during Occupy was like that. And from this discussion, I think it's pretty clear that the Communist Party and like Larry Itliong organized very differently. So I was hoping you guys could like talk a little bit about how like you guys organized, how Larry Itliong organized, and share some of that.
Did you repeat the question, please?
Basically, like how did the CP or the UFW organize in a way that's like different from the very short attention span that like organizing in the Bay Area has nowadays?
Well, I really believe at my age and what I've experienced, both here in this country and also in Mexico. And I don't know if many of you understand, but this whole question of privatization here, education, many other things, especially education. We all know Obama supports the charter school system. In Mexico, they're doing it. There's a revolution right now. There's marches by the radical rebellious group out of the National Teachers Union, 1.6 million. Not all of them, but the major part of them are fighting back. And that's what's lacking here. But in light of that, they're also have privatized the nationalization of oil back from 1938 under Lázaro Cárdenas. This was Shell, Chevron, all the corporate, thieves and billionaires who were kicked out back then, and more so now, that ever since then, have been wanting to go back. And they found a puppet, which is this, I call cacique, which is a Spanish, immigrant from Spain, who now becomes president. Does not look indigenous at all. And what's happened is that Carlos Salinas was the beginning of being trained at Harvard, and all these Harvard technocrats in the US who run the government. The old Spanish families have taken deep control. So today there's a revolution, and what's happening is that you see this button, which is the 43 missing students that were kidnapped by the police in Iguala, Guerrero, which is tantamount to this school is a revolutionary school of thought. 3 of the most famous revolutionary guerrillas in Mexico actually came from these schools. And nothing's changed back then in 1970s through that period up to this point. So these young people started to question this whole question of why are these president. But anyway, today there's a movement, an independent movement, that's moving towards politically, economically, socially, and labor. And by building that at the grassroots level, they're no longer accepting and recognizing any political party. Any political party. What they're saying is that they're going to build at the grassroots level autonomous assemblies and autonomous independent community groups. By allowing the people at the community level to take hold of their own communities. And they've taken over by, first of all, where the violence comes from is the local police. Then after that, state police. In the local communities in Michoacán, Guerrero, Chiapas, and other communities, they have really taken the brunt of mobilizing autodefensa. Self-defense, civil society taking the authority, arresting them, and holding them and charging them. These are police officers who have been corrupt and tied with the drug cartel. And if all of you know, many don't know, Plan Merida, which is initiated by George Bush, has been pouring money into actually not fighting the drugs, because the government is the drug dealer, and the politicians are the drug dealers, and going after civil dissent, social dissent. And they've killed them, beheaded them, and disappeared them. Today, these 43 students, the government says, oh, the police handed them over to the narcos in the jungles of Guerrero, and is being told about what we saw in a dump. They were burned to death by the pile of tires, rubber tires, limbs, trees, whatever, to burn and incinerate to ashes 43 students within the next 7 hours. We know what it takes, to burn a body here in this country, to incinerate into ashes. A lot of intense fire. But anyway, that's the situation of why they're taking over those communities. They've arrested many of these people, they're in prison, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on this. But in Mexico, you do whatever, okay? But there's a struggle there and here, because the same evil forces in Washington. And it's not really Washington per se, Obama and the administration and the Congress for being prostitutes to the corporations. It's the corporations. They now have controlled the power of, it's by the corporations, for the corporations, and controlled by the corporations. And now we have Shell, Chevron, already there signing agreements and taking their oil. And who's going to suffer? Is the people. And the schools are being privatized. Likewise here. Okay? So anyway, I say that's the movement. It's independent organizing at the grassroots level. And for me it's too late, but there's a lot of young people who we've been mentoring, who getting them educated, oriented in that area.
Well, I just want to say I greatly appreciate this presentation because you're throwing the sunlight on some very evil aspects of labor history. There's stuff we didn't know in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and especially the younger generation doesn't know. And the fact that we're seeing things coming full circle, because what started with the expulsion of leftists from the AFL-CIO, we're now reaping the bitter fruit of it. The fact that labor is sold out, they can attack pensions, they can basically attack tenure for teachers. This stuff, we're really helpless against this attack. And so what we have to do is we have to start organizing, and basically it may be without union officials. It may be just a rank and file revolt. It has to be like the IWW was in the 20s. And we have to do honor to their history.
I just want to respond on that. And I don't think people have seen it, but I've seen it in the State Workers Union when the SCIU wanted us to, affiliate with them. And we agreed and we negotiated with them. At the end, Andy Stern says, now everybody's going to be a member of the union. Question? Yeah, Al, what's your question? Not in this union. Now define what you're saying. He said, no, about everybody. Does everybody mean staff, employees who live out for our union dues? Yes. I said, well, shove it up your ass because we're not going to agree to that. So we called the caucus, came back and said, no way. And the reason I said this was because Eliseo Medina, I just use him as an example. There are many others. He came out of the Farm Workers Union, came out of farm workers. Okay? But as he left because he was pissed off with Chavez, and basically Chavez pushed him out, he left. We believed he was going to be the guy maybe taking over the union, leading the union. And we had Chavez, some subtle conversations, Chavez and I, about, these kinds of things. He didn't appreciate it. But anyway, the bottom line is that Eliseo goes to work for many unions as a professional, earning good money, no longer coming out of the rank and file. He climbs into the hierarchy of the SEIU, and all of a sudden, he's earning $200,000-300,000 a year. No problem. That's the member's decision. But the bottom line is that he never came out of the rank and file out of the SEIU. That prevalent in the SEIU. When I asked questions, we went to conventions in Chicago. I said, "Hey, brother, we're like in a meeting, Latino Chicano caucus of the SEIU. This is a national. I want to ask a question of all of you here. How many people here are staffers, and how many people are rank and file? Rank and file is a dirty word, okay? How dare you, Rojas, single us out as the wrong tribe? What do you mean? Raise your hands. How many people here rank and file? Well, maybe about 10, 25 of them didn't raise their hand. Now I know who's here. And your delegates here with your damn effing badges? How dare you in this committee? Where's your rank and file? Rank and file here. That is a prevalent situation in the AFL-CIO and SEIU. It's no longer dominated by the rank and file and the leadership from the bottom. That's why I think it's one ingredient of what's happening. Anyway, next question. You had a question?
Well, I mean, I think the strategy of the union bureaucracy, not just Chavez, is that the Democrats and elections will solve our problems.
Right.
And actually, the majority of work of unions in this country is electioneering. In fact, this upcoming election, Hillary, Bernie Sanders, they're not mobilizing like for the BART strike. When the BART workers went out, the union did not mobilize its membership to support the BART workers. We had some rallies, Transport Workers Solidarity, but it was like pulling teeth to get them to bring their members out. What are they afraid of? And this is, other unions have contracts and they expire. Now, this coming year, the city college teachers are without a contract. The state college professors are without a contract. They're coming into a major battle. And they don't want to say war, class war. That's what it is. So what we have to fight for is to unify all workers, all education workers, with students and demand open admissions and make the billionaires pay. There are 100 billionaires in California. There's so much wealth in California. But the capitalists and Democrats are not saying you capitalists have to pay for this crisis. That's what the union should be saying. But we have to win over the students and the teachers to say, this is what you need. If you're going to go into a war, you have to prepare for war. And that's why Warren Buffett said there's a one-side class war in this country and we're winning. Warren Buffett said that. But the leadership of the unions don't want to say class war. The middle class and let's get into the middle. They don't want to talk about class war, but the capitalists are engaging in a class war against the working class. No ifs, ands, and buts. So I think that there are going to be coming big battles, and this example of the Mexican workers is a big class war. And the thing that was so significant is, as Al said, silence by the United Farm Workers Union, which was not supporting, not having demonstration. The United Farm Workers could call for mass demonstrations to support these workers and stop the products. Call for the long term and stop all products from the fields.
Right.
They didn't want to do that because that means a battle against not just the bosses but the Democrats who run California.
Right.
The Democrats run the legislature, the Democrats run the government, the state government. We have to fight them. There's no other way. Last point on education. Privatization is being pushed by the Democrats. Obama, Jerry Brown, and by the AFT and the United NEA. You know why? They say we want to have good charter schools in California. We want to make the charters good. Well, how do you make private charter schools good? I mean, who is that? I mean, you don't, it's like a cancer. We're going to make the cancer better. We're going to control the cancer. You have to destroy it. And I think that's another struggle that is happening. And there's an initiative to eliminate charters in California. To say change the law and have no more charters. And I think that's a political battle, not just against the charters and the privatizers, but against the Democrats and union officials who don't want to fight directly privatization of education. That's it. Howard?
Yeah, history shows history of the workers' movement shows that no gains can be made, including organizing workers into unions, getting contracts, without at least two basic conditions. One, full union democracy. In other words, empower workers.
Right.
In other words, the absence of bureaucracy. During the major upheavals of the 1930s, when the mass production industries were organized under semi-legal conditions or illegal conditions, there was this mass uprising. Workers were empowered. They learned in the process. Workers who had never belonged to unions learned in the process. And it was a very fascinating, interesting process to see how workers quite rapidly learned how to organize if they were empowered. But when you have this elaborate bureaucracy, nothing's going to happen. It ain't going to happen with this bureaucracy in charge. The other thing is that no gains can be made by the workers in this country unless you're willing to do what is necessary to win, which means mass picketing. It means you mentioned secondary boycotts, all illegal. No gains were ever made by workers in this country without being prepared to violate the law. This was true in the 30s. Almost everything they did, the sit-in strikes were strictly illegal. I mean, how can you occupy private property? But they did it and it worked. So these conditions have to be met, and there isn't any leadership present almost anywhere in the trade union movement that shows that preparation to even begin to carry out that kind of. And when workers do try to organize and behave in a democratic fashion, they're rapidly strangled by a union bureaucracy. When they attempt to carry out strike actions that are effective, they're strangled by the government or the union bureaucracy capitulating to the government. It isn't going to be easy.
Yes?
Yeah, I'd just like to add something you mentioned just now, and that is, I think the biggest element missing in the labor movement and why it's so damn corrupt and so bureaucratic and so much failing is lack of democracy. There's no democracy in the farm workers union. Had there been, it would have still been a union. It would have been a very strong union, I think, with full leadership from the Filipino workers as well as the other workers that make up the union. It failed because there was no democracy. It was run from up on a hill in Tehachapi Mountains by Caesar and the group of bureaucrats that surrounded him, and it destroyed itself. And one person plus many others helped destroy it, which was a disaster for farm workers. It could have been a tremendously strong union in California and many other states of this country had there been democracy and workers being able to decide whether there's a strike or whether there's a boycott or whatever they were doing at that time. One person with a very coerced, small council of people made the decisions, and many of them were disastrous.
I think we all agree with you. You know, when you don't have the rank and file in charge, right, there is no workers' democracy. And there's no such thing as a union, a genuine union, without rank and file. And the leadership, on down. Okay, let me get you first. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on this thing about democracy and union. I think Al started to speak about it in the middle of his speech, Howard towards the end. So the problem is the union bureaucracy, but you can't just, democracy isn't handed down from above.
No.
Right.
Democracy is a revolt from below,
I agree.
replacing the trade union bureaucracy. Every important strike, not just in this country, but around the world, has been, in order to fight the employers, the capitalists, you have to first remove the union bureaucracy, which is complicit with the employers. That's what happened here with the Longshore Strike in 1934. First, they had to go up against the bureaucracy from New York that was coming here to try to impose a contract that the employers wanted. But there was a revolution, a revolt, led by people around the Communist Party, to their credit. And the same thing happened in Minneapolis in the same year, 34. It was by the Teamsters. There was a strike. First, they had to go up against Tobin, the president of the Teamsters Union, who was in close collaboration with the government under Roosevelt. But they had to strike against their union officials in order to strike against the employers. And that's the problem we face today. So I think what's really key here is within the trade unions, there needs to be a building caucuses, class struggle caucuses, that are going to mean, as Howard was saying, picket lines mean don't cross. That's illegal. But we've done it in recent years. In fact, just last year during the anti-Zim protests in the port, we put up picket lines and we said don't cross. Longshoremen honored that. But that's how you win strikes. The laws are made for capital. Law and order in this country, and what the police do is to enforce capital's laws against labor. And when workers realize what's going on, they can begin to form caucuses on a class struggle basis and fight against not only the capitalists, but the labor lieutenants of capital that are running the trade union movement.
Very good.
Any questions?
Yes, I'd like to raise something a little bit different from what's been discussed so far. And that is, I'm a delegate to the San Francisco Labor Council, and we had a decision by the leadership that they were going to request suggestions on how to improve things in the labor movement in San Francisco. So I raised it, said, well, why don't we have, instead of having just representatives of this union and that union, what if we had representatives of the unemployed? So we had an unemployed council be a member organization of the union. Well, that didn't really fly too well with the leadership of the council. But I do think it's something that it's an idea whose time has come. And that way we can get members of the working class who are not members of the union, which is the majority, the vast majority of the working class, involved in these labor organizations.
Yeah. Steve brought up one of the things that I was thinking about when I made my earlier question. A lot of the people who attempted to organize ATU 192 during the BOT strike are here in this room. And what we were trying to do was to convince the bus drivers to organize jointly with the BOT workers so that they would strike together. But concretely, what we managed to do was we managed to get the bus drivers to vote no on their contract, largely by getting onto the buses and handing out flyers to the drivers and telling them that they needed to make a no vote. But when we attempted to organize on a larger scale, when we had tried to build the bridges between the BOT workers and the bus drivers, that didn't come together. So that was why I was asking and hoping for some insight, like how did, for example, like Larry Itliong organize? How did he build those structures, and how did he approach that problem?
I think when we saw the film about Domingo and Berenice, what really comes out is that the right began to understand that who they truly were the left within the union, right? So like I said, when I recounted my personal interaction with Itliong, what it showed was this. The first generation of Filipino trade unionists and political activists were, because they had the Communist Party, USA. And let me tell you, the CPUSA, of course, is was a fraternal organization with the Communist Party of the Philippines. I don't know how much folks know what that relationship was about, but from the very, very beginning, the ILWU was kind of like the juggernaut in there. And I was once very, very privileged to meet Bill Bailey. I didn't know who he was when I met him outside in Honolulu. But he told me something that kind of, put it all together for me. He told me, I think he was there for an ILWU conference. He had kind of introduced himself. He asked me, "You're Filipino, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, when the ships used to go to Manila to pick up Filipino sacadas, workers, we would be on there. And I just thought he meant ILWU. We would be on those ships. And he said, by the time we got back to Honolulu, all the Filipino workers already had their union card, and the first place they went to the union hall. I said, wow, that's amazing. And as I reflected on that, I said, it wasn't just the ILWU, because Bill Bailey, he asked me a couple of things. Well, how do you say this in Ilocano, and how do you say that? And I thought, well, wait a minute. If he couldn't speak Ilocano, and those Filipino workers couldn't speak English, who was really doing the organizing? So what I realized was that it was members, it was cadre of the Communist Party. They were the stowaways on the ships, and they were the ones bringing in, making sure that everyone that stepped off to work on those plantations in Hawaii, that they would be, they would join the union, no question about that. And there would be no scab labor at all, because that's of course what many of them were brought to do, was to break some of the big strikes that were building in the 30s and 40s. So that was the key thing. My feeling is, and that's why, when I first met Steve and Cosme, and they started talking to me about, Labor Fest and what, this whole month of activities, and I thought, well, that's great. But as you look at it, think, well, why do we need Labor Fest? And that's because the left, we need an organized left outside the trade union movement. That's what kept Itliong and Vera Cruz and Ben Gimes and Velasco going through all those decades. Like I said, those were decades of defeat, of disappointment, betrayal. God, you had to have a strong stomach to keep going. I mean, organizing in Alaska, organizing in Salinas, organizing all over the place, and never really winning that decisive battles that would create the union. Those were hard times those men lived through. But they couldn't have done that without the Communist Party. They couldn't have done it. That's what brought all the most advanced Filipino workers together, because they were members of the party. That's what kept them as a united and a collective leadership. It was that. So by the time that 60s came, as Howard told me, the CPUSA in the Central Valley had collapsed. There was no other chapter. There was nothing, Itliong and the others, they had no base of support. They were isolated. Even within the union that they helped to create, they had already become politically isolated. There was no independent base outside the trade union. Again, you'll see that with Jean Verdes. We were all members of the Union of Democratic Filipinos, KDP. Our organization, there was no CP. We were very closely aligned with the Communist Party of the Philippines, ML, Jose, Sison, Joma. Very close, right? And we kind of followed their direction. But like I said, when we got into our work within the community or within the trade unions, That's the leadership, the ideological leadership we look to. And when that organization, when the CPE Philippines kind of split again, it kind of left us, you know. And so that, I think, is the key thing. And that's what the break was between the first generation and the second generation of Filipinos, is that we did not have a left organization that carried on that continuity for us. And now, like I said, second generation, we're about the end of our organizing lifespan. When we're looking now, where's that third generation, and how is it going to emerge, and how will we help it to emerge? And that's why I said, you know, I invite all of you to join Labor Fest. We're an inclusive organization. My part, of course, was I really wanted to highlight the history of Filipinos in the labor struggle as an integral part of the U.S. working class. One last thing, Al, where's Al? He will be speaking again on the lessons of NAFTA for workers and farmers. That is really key. If we don't understand what's going to happen with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, take a look at what NAFTA did to Mexico. It destroyed it's destroying the agricultural base. Why? Because it wants to drive poor Mexican farmers and agricultural workers either to come to the United States or to work on U.S. and multinational plantations that just are, you know, are throughout Baja and northern Mexico. So please join us for every one of the activities. And again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming. I hope that you did get something out of it. And please, if you ever run into all those loyalists, Chavez loyalists, have the courage to ask them the questions that we've asked. Have the courage to challenge them and say, really? If you go to Delano for the celebration, just say, is there any agricultural worker here that can say that your life has improved since you've been a member of the UFW? Is there any agriculture? And just know that was another bad concession that Filipinos took. We should never have dropped the word agricultural workers. It was Chavez who came in with the term farm workers. Why? Because he wanted to just focus on working in green crop in farms. That meant don't organize all the agricultural sector. I mean, don't organize those that are working then in packing sheds, in the canneries, in the processing plants like that. Just that small. And that was a bad concession, because the Teamsters could go in and start chopping off the packers and, you know, bulk, you know, pretty much, you know, fragmentizing our organizing. So again, I ask you, do not use that term, farm workers. It's a rightist term. We are organizing agricultural workers from Alaska, right, to Hawaii on the plantations, right? If you're working in agriculture and you're working on a plantation, right, you're still an agricultural worker. Those workers in Mexico that are working for Driscoll and all those U.S. corporations, they are plantation workers, they are agricultural workers just like us. So the correct term, yeah. Okay, anyway, I was supposed to say thank you for coming. Please.